Yo guys, how you all doing today? It's FanFic Reader here, and today we are carrying on with the Avengers of Steel story. One chapter in, and there is so much more to go. I hope you're all having an amazing Easter, and I hope you all enjoy the story that's about to be told, because there's so much more to go. You ready? Let's do this. Chapter 2. Arriving in New York before the Kryptonian invasion. Clark couldn't help but to open a big smile when he looked at the beautiful city. New York, the Big Apple, the most populous city of all of the United States of America. He had never seen anything quite like that. Of course, having lived most of his life in Smallville would make it all the more impressive. Not that Clark hadn't left before. He had, after all, travelled a good portion of the world while looking for traces of his origins. But he had definitely never stayed in one of the big cities, and certainly not one as impressive as this. As he walked down the street, he big travelling bag on his shoulders, he tried to take in the sights as best he could. There were people everywhere bumping on each other as they walked on the sidewalks. Cars, buses, motorcycles filled the streets. The noise they made surrounding the air, music blasting from the inside the stores of every kind. The smell of different kinds of foods caressed Clark's nose, making his stomach growl. It was all so different from Smallville and the other places he had been that it might as well have been another planet. But despite all those differences, Clark was really excited to be moving to the big city, to start this new phase in his life, to chase his dream of becoming a journalist. It wouldn't be easy, he knew that, for all his work on the high school's newspaper and the several journalism courses he took. Clark still didn't have any real experience. So, he was moving to a new city without a guaranteed job, with no previous references beside his old articles, and without knowing anybody in this city. And in this economy, or so everybody would say to him every chance they had, nobody was hiring. But Clark wouldn't let this bring him down. He had talent and he had will. That was all an honest man needed to succeed in life. His dad used to say, at least. Of course, there was the real reason behind wanting to be a journalist. It was a job where he could keep his ear to the ground, where people wouldn't look twice when he wanted to go somewhere dangerous and start asking questions. A job that would give him the chance to finally do what his parents, both adopted and biological, believed he could do. To use his gifts for good. Clark stopped at a crosswalk waiting for the traffic lights to turn green, his mind wandering for a second, thinking back on how he had ended up in this situation. He had to admit it was quite the journey. After his dad, Jonathan Kent, died, Clark was numb. Everything he was, he owed to his family. And to have the other half of that family ripped from him so early was a shock. He simply didn't see it coming. A heart attack, probably one of the most, if not the most, common cause of death in the world. And something that he couldn't fix despite all of those powers. He was devastated. He was lost, he was angry. And most of all, he was confused. Should he have noticed something? Should he have expected that? Because he didn't, at all. The thought of his father passing away had never crossed his mind, not even once. And Clark didn't know if that happened because he was young, naive, or if he just didn't see it because he was a superpowered alien who never got sick in all of his life. Not for the first time, his unknown past plagued him with doubts. He didn't want to be different. He didn't like being something else. He didn't like not knowing what he was. And with his father passing away, he never felt so alone with all of his doubts. His mother was the one who shook him out of this depression. And the reason he left Smallville, Martha Kent was a strong woman. And a very scary mother, when she needed to be, of course. She had told Clark not too gently that he had a choice. He could stay there, depressed into this little dark world, whining about all the problems he had in his life, or he could get up and do something about it. Don't know what you are? Go look for clues to see if you can find something out. Feeling sad because you were different? Everybody's different. Grow up. Be your own sort of unique. Can't understand humanity because you're not one? Then get out of your bubble and try and learn something useful from other people. Feeling useless because you can't help everybody? Hone your abilities and use them to help those you can. Clark smiled a little bit thinking about his mother. She was a lovely person, but she could scare even him, a bulletproof alien, when she had to. She was the one that gave him the kickstart he needed to go out into the world. And go out he did, for years, learning everything he could, training his abilities, searching for clues about his past. Surprisingly, he ended up learning more about his own morals than anything else. At least in the beginning. He found out that he liked to help people, and so he did, as often as he could. It was by doing that Clark observed something valuable. Good actions generated good actions. All some people needed to start doing good deeds themselves was a little push, A little example, a little help. And sometimes, in a world that could more often than not be unforgiving and harsh, that was the most difficult thing to find. So when Clark finally came back to Smallville, he did it with this sense of a job well done. He had done what he set out to do, and seeing the knowing smile on his mother when he hugged her made it all worth it. And she knew all along that he would succeed. The only one who needed proof was him, apparently. He spent a couple months in Smallville after coming back, telling his mother everything he had learnt and seen about his experiences and his past, about his biological family and his people. Not that he hadn't told her before, an abridged version here and there every time he called home, but nothing could beat actually sitting down and talking while eating a piece of apple pie. He was happy, his mother was happy, and for the first time since the passing of Jonathan Kent, Clark felt like he could finally move on without bricks on his chest. Which brought him finally to New York, to hopefully the beginning of a successful career. But first, before trying his hand into becoming a legendary journalist, Clark needed to find a place to live. And that was probably one place someone with no job, no family money, and limited savings that came working in diners could look for in New York. The neighborhood was almost wiped off the map during the incident. Walking through the streets of Hell's Kitchen, Clark could understand why the prices were so sympathetic to his pockets. The place had been hit hardest during the Battle of New York. Everywhere he looked, he saw signs of a fight, destroyed buildings, debris still on the sidewalks, the big cranes making repairs. The Avengers had saved the world. But the aliens had taken a piece of it before throwing in the towel. That piece was Hell's Kitchen. Clark felt his mood dampen a little bit. An alien invasion. An honest-to-God freaking alien invasion had happened and he wasn't there to help. An alien invasion had happened and he was elsewhere looking for clues about aliens. If it wasn't so tragic, the irony would make him laugh. Well, that wouldn't happen again, Clark promised himself. Now that he had actually learned how to fly. Shaking off his bad mood, Clark began to hasten his steps. He was going to meet the real estate agent that had rented the place to him, and it wouldn't be very gentlemanly of him to keep a lady waiting, especially in this dangerous neighborhood. Susan Harris was tapping her foot impatiently. Mr. Kent was late. It was bad enough to be in this part of town for any amount of time, surrounded by an unsavoury element on the ruined landscape, but to be waiting here indefinitely, that was a cause for worry. Hell's Kitchen change after the incident could be quantified between worse and even worse. Before it wasn't that bad. Full of restaurants of every kind, good places for good people who enjoyed music and any kind of artistic performance, and in general, just full of good people. Things like that tend to change when an alien army arrives on top of it. The damage to Hell's Kitchen was astronomical. Several people lost their homes. The buildings that were left standing were in poor condition. Water and energy completely cut off. Businesses closing their doors. The situation now wasn't nearly as bad as it was for a few weeks after the invasion. But it was just a shadow of what it used to be. Because of that, the prices had dropped tremendously. Nobody wanted to stay there. Nobody had options, wanted to move there. Supply and demand, things would get better in time, she hoped. With how much work and money Union Allied construction was pouring there, but for now prices were low. Which brought Susan to her current predicament, waiting for a client that was probably poor as a church mouse who she could only hope would arrive before she was mugged. It wasn't an absurd possibility. Susan Harris stuck out like a sore thumb. Blonde, beautiful, dressed in a form-fitting white dress and black high heels. She was surrounded by a bunch of people in old jeans and ragged coats going to work. Given the risen numbers of violence and assaults since the incident, well, she wasn't exactly crazy for being worried. "Susan Harris?" someone asked from behind her. "Finally," she muttered, turning to speak to Mr. Kent with an irritated look on her face. And as soon as she did turn, the angry frown disappeared, replaced by wide eyes. Susan was not expecting this. She had to admit, Mr. Kent was beyond hot. And she used that word very rarely, only on special occasions. Tall, dark hair, gorgeous blue eyes, and oh my, did he have muscles. Big, defined muscles, and she could only imagine how ripped his stomach would be. Clark cleared his throat when the silence extended. "Mrs. Harris, I'm sorry for being late," he said sheepishly. "I guess I overestimated my sense of direction." The sound of his voice snapped Susan back to reality. Her cheeks were now a bit rosy. "Not at all, Mr. Kent. I wasn't here for long anyway," she said, suddenly cheerful. She extended her hand, and it's Miss, she added unconsciously for her internal embarrassment. She shook her head a little bit. Susan Harris, Midtown Property Solutions. Clark Kent, but please, call me Clark, he said, shaking her hand with a dazzling smile. Strong hands, Susan thought, holding on a little bit longer than what was socially acceptable. So this is the place, Clark said, since apparently Susan's mind was elsewhere. Yes, she confirmed quickly, turning towards the entrance of the building. For a few seconds, Clark didn't say anything. It's, severe. Yes, severe, Susan agreed, though the word she would have used is dump. But don't let yourself be fooled by the plain look of the buildings. Regardless of how it looks on the outside, it's a very well placed. There are several good restaurants here, the subway is only a few blocks that way, and at night there are a few good bars around if you like that sort of thing. Let it never be said that Susan Harris was bad at her job. Well, that doesn't sound so bad, he agreed, and he looked at her. So, let's go in? Absolutely. She crossed her arm with Clark's and guided him through the entrance. The inside was as gloomy as the outside, but without the sunlight to help, it was old and unkept place. Not the cleanest either, she noticed. She pressed the button on the elevator as fast as she could. There aren't a lot of occupied apartments in the building, she said, as Clark looked around. But you will share the floor with 2 others, if I recall. They probably are lovely people. The people of Hell's Kitchen tend to be very welcoming. When they arrived at the right floor, the doors opened, showing the corridor, and with doors on both sides and one door right at the end. A woman was coming out of that apartment. There, that is one of your neighbours, Susan said happily. The woman approached the elevator with fast steps. She had black hair, very white skin, and was using a black leather jacket and old jeans. Her face, however, couldn't exactly be described as what you'd consider welcoming. Well, good morning. Fuck off, interrupted the woman, sliding past them and entering the elevator. Susan shared a nervous look with a wide-eyed Clark. Monday's right. They get the best of us. God damn these people, Susan thought. If Clark hadn't already made a deposit, he would have probably made a run for it. This building was terrible, and it was apparently full of aggressive nut jobs. Though she kept her cool face outwardly. They were already there, nothing could go wrong anymore. She reached for her purse to get the keys of the apartment when they arrived in front of the door. However, it seemed to be unlocked, only halfway closed. Frowning, she opened, only to jump back when a man got up from the couch and pointed a knife at her. What are you doing in my apartment? She didn't even notice when Clark stepped in front of her. She was suddenly blocked by his broad back. Oh God, this couldn't be happening. She didn't want to be stabbed, at least of all in a place like Hell's Kitchen. She frantically looked for her phone, ready to call 911, only to be stopped by an alarmingly calm Clark. Hey, there's no need for that, he said with a smile, walking forward. He's not going to attack us, we just surprised him. Right? Clark kept walking, no hesitation, no sign of fear whatsoever. And despite the situation, Susan suddenly felt completely safe. So what's your favourite, crunchy or smooth? For a second, Susan didn't understand until she noticed the jar of peanut butter on the man's hand. The knife she was so afraid of was a kitchen knife, and he was just using it to eat. Crunchy, of course, the man mumbled, putting the knife back in the jar and scratching his nose. Is there another way to eat it? No, as far as I'm concerned, Clark said, still smiling, stopping in front of the man. So, what's your name? The man hesitated for a second, looking at Clark. He looked terribly unhealthy, especially standing so close to a big, strong man as Clark was. He was thin, had black skin, wasn't particularly tall. He was also undoubtedly a drug addict. Malcolm, he muttered. I'm Clark. He extended his hand and, after a moment, Malcolm shook it. I think I'm your new neighbour. Yeah? Yep, but the thing is, I'm almost certain that this apartment here is the one I'm renting. Do you think you got confused and entered the wrong one? Malcolm shrugged, non-committedly. Happened before. Clark smiled again. A friend of mine entered the wrong classroom once when we were kids. Went all the way to the back and actually sat down. Small town, people still laugh about it to this day. Even Susan smiled at that bit. Clark's good mood was just so infectious. So, why don't I help you get to your apartment so I can get this lovely lady to go back to her work? Alright, Malcolm agreed. Susan moved out of the way as he watched Clark guide the obviously high man back to his apartment. The peanut butter jar in his hand, she held back a smile when the man turned to the wrong side again. Trying to enter the apartment, they saw the woman leave earlier, and Clark had to turn him around to the other one. When he came back, Susan couldn't hold herself back anymore. Mr. Kent, I am so sorry about this, she said fast before she even regained her senses. This place is horrible. You have a rude neighbour on one side and junkie on the other. The streets aren't safe. He interrupted her with a hand on her shoulder. Hey, it's alright. It's not so bad, I'm sure. After a good scrub, this apartment will be good as new. Malcolm's not a bad guy, just a little confused. And the woman? Well, you were right, Mondays can be rough. This man was a saint, Susan thought. I know that I can't expect much with a budget like mine, so you don't have to apologise, Mrs. Harris. Miss Harris, sorry. You did the best you could, and I'm happy. She could have cried right then and there. She hoped New York wouldn't tear him apart. He was probably the nicest person she's ever met. Well, Clark, if you are satisfied, then so am I. Here are your keys, she said, handing him the keys. But I must say, if there is any problem at all, you can just give me a call and I'll see what I can do, okay? He gave her a beautiful smile and shook her hand. I promise. And thank you, Miss Harris. She hesitated before turning and then added, and if you ever needed anyone to show you around, you could give me a call too. Before he could answer, she gave him a saucy smile and left. Clark was a little bit shocked. He definitely wasn't in Kansas anymore. Shaking himself out of his stupor, but still with a big smile on his face from being asked out by a gorgeous woman, Clark turned to look at his apartment. Despite his reassurance to Miss Harris, the apartment really wasn't much. A living room, a kitchen, a bedroom, and a bathroom. There was no TV, it was small, dark, and the furniture could very well belong to a house of the old USSR. He was pretty sure the fridge actually was from East Germany. There was nothing he could do now. He tossed his bag on the couch, and he used his super speed to put his stuff on the designated places all over the apartment in a few seconds. Tomorrow he would have to buy some food and cleaning products, and a broom. He couldn't forget a broom because the amount of dust that rose when he ran made him feel like he was in the middle of a sandstorm. But now there was no time to clean the new home. Now Clark was going out, and hopefully, when he got back, he would be employed. He took the list from his pocket where he had written the names of addresses of newspapers in New York, opened the door, and left. Today was going to be a good day, Clark thought. Natasha Romanoff walked quickly through the halls of the Triskelion, S.H.I.E.L.D.'s headquarters in Washington, D.C. As quickly as she walked, though, the people who crossed her path moved even quicker to get out of her way. Natasha was an intimidating woman. There were several factors that contributed to that, like her confidence, her phenomenal good looks, her immense sharpness, and her no-nonsense attitude, along with her Avengers membership. Her ability to kill any person, armed or unarmed, trained or untrained, using any kind of weapon or simply her bare hands was probably a factor too. She stopped in front of a door and knocked, entering soon after without waiting for permission. You called? She asked, a small smile on her face. Nick Fury didn't even turn his chair. I have a job for you, he said, still looking through the big open window in his office. Fury's office was a beautiful room, modestly furnished, bright and with lots of space. There were screens on the wall in front of his desk and, behind it, a striking view of the city. And sat on a chair by Fury's desk. I do hope it's better than the last one, she said, making herself comfortable in the leather chair. Can you even imagine how tedious it was to observe a mob's accountant? The man was so predictably boring that one day he mistook salt for sugar after pouring it into his coffee. I actually thought you were punishing me for something. Nick gave her a little smile. Well, they can't all be alien invasions, can they? Well, if those are my two options, I'll take the accountant. She rolled her eyes. But we'll see how long it takes until I wish another alien invasion upon us. How about something in between? Fury asked. Natasha raised her eyebrows slightly, even if inside she felt a bit more surprised than that. What do you mean? Fury turned one of his monitors so she could see it. 3.5 months ago, the Canadian Army found something buried in thick ice in Ellesmere Island. They didn't have the equipment necessary to know what exactly it was, so they made a joint operation with the American stuff to find out what they could. We didn't send anyone in with them? Natasha asked, her eyes on the screen. Of course we did, just not officially. But a previous associate of ours was invited because of her expertise, Dr. Jane Foster, and, of course, her assistant, Miss Darcy Lewis. As I understand, they tried to contact Eric Selvig, but as you probably know, he's still treating himself because of the number Loki did on his mind. She liked where this was going less and less. What could an astrophysicist know about an object trapped in ice, she asked, already guessing the answer. He did not disappoint her. It wasn't about where the object was at the moment, but where it was 20,000 years ago. Out of this planet. There was a stream of curses coming from her in Russian. Yes, That's exactly what I said too, only in English, Fury replied, laughing ironically. But wait, it gets even better. One day after Dr. Foster arrived, there was a huge tremor. The specialists would have thought it was an earthquake, if not for the fact several lights turned on beneath the eyes, and suddenly an alien spaceship rose to the sky and disappeared into the night. Her eyes closed for a moment as she refrained from cursing again. They lost an alien ship? She asked, her voice perfectly calm. They did, confirmed Fury. They weren't exactly equipped to chase it, and the ship simply doesn't show on our sensors. It either buried itself back in ice, or its technology is too advanced to be noticed by ours, she completed. Precisely. We have no idea where this thing is, he tilted his head. But at least it's not killing people. Nobody there died, the ship just took off. Romanoff studied the screen again, seeing the grimy images of the ship. What's the other lead you have then? She asked, knowing she was there for more than one reason. Fury smiled. There is one. The Canadian Forces hired a company called Arctic Cargo to transport everything they needed. There were 67 workers when they arrived. After the ship left, there were 66. After analysis, we reached the oh-so-surprising conclusion that his documents were fake, and that left us without a name or a picture. How do you know it simply isn't an illegal left after things became too heated? Because of the testimony of our Norse god's friend, Darcy Lewis. I can't even begin to quote from memory, so let me read it. Here it is. He looked at the text on the screen and read, "He totally saved our lives when the killer robot attacked and almost killed Jane. He just appeared and ripped the thing in two with his bare hands." How did he look like? Wow, where do I begin? He was a dark-haired, hunky, blue-eyed beefcake of a man, and I wanted to bite him. I told Jane that I have dibs on this one. She can't take all the good-looking aliens for herself. How do I know he was an alien? Well, that's a stupid question. He operated on Jane with laser eyes. He went, and destroyed the robot. What else could he be? Captain Canada, who was frozen in the ice? It really was a testament to Natasha's training that she didn't laugh when Fury read that. So, an alien that looks like a human with dark hair and blue eyes is strong and has laser eyes stole the ship, Natasha asked. And before that, he was working for Arctic Cargo with fake documents. Well, it's a lead, though I personally should speak to Dr. Foster and Miss Lewis, they might know more. Fury nodded, and suddenly looked very serious. We need to find this man Romanoff. We have an alien with unknown strength and motivations who is in possession of an alien ship inside our planet. If we don't deal with this swiftly, it could turn into another incident. Natasha got up. I can't believe they're calling it the incident, she said, looking at Fury. I was there. I remember it being a little more than a simple incident. She looked at Fury. I have no intention of letting something like that happen again. Saying this, Natasha Romanoff turned and left the room. She was already missing the accountant. Hey guys, it's Fanfic Reader here. I want to say a big thank you for listening to the story of Chapter 2 of The Avengers of Steel. As always, the link to the author of the story and the full story itself will be in the description down below. Thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next chapter.